Good morning, everybody. We'll get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Chamber for the first of our Ask the Experts series, which is going to continue all year. We have 8 different folks lined up to talk on topics right across the spectrum, and we're very, very excited about today's with David. Before we get into that, though, by way of land acknowledgement, I'd like to talk a little bit about the actions that the Chamber is taking in respect on our journey of reconciliation. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a partnership that we launched last week with the Southern First Nations Secretariat. You can find them at sfns.on.ca. Strongly recommend all employers in the London region memorize that and go there. They have a job bank which connects employers and employment agencies with with Indigenous folks who are looking for work. So job bank, hire Indigenous. They have a business directory which connects you with an opportunity to buy goods and services from Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs. Job bank, hire Indigenous, business directory, buy Indigenous. The second thing I wanted to announce for the first time is we are in a partnership now with Noki Kwe. I'm sure folks know Noki Kwe, charitable organization that offers services geared to those who are experiencing challenges with unemployment, career decision-making, precarious employment, employment maintenance, folks looking for literacy, school training supports, career transition. Incredible, incredible charity here in London. And we have a first-of-its-kind partnership with them, which is being supported by the Chamber, Libro, and the City of London. The program, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, centers on the importance of self-determination, access to decent work, is a means of self-determination. So in collaboration with Noki Kwe, we are going to assist Noki Kwe in expanding upon its programming and for strengthening its partnerships with the local business community, with a distinct emphasis on helping settler-led businesses shift their approaches to recruitment and retention in a way that is rooted in cultural safety for the local Indigenous workforce. On September 30th, we are publishing our Indigenous Community Engagement Report. This took us about 1.5 years to put together. It's got best practices in there for businesses. One of the reasons this report is so urgent and needed is that we have learned through business surveys that fully 33% of businesses do not believe that reconciliation, that the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission even apply to them. And most businesses that engage in reconciliation activities do it on the individual level. So it's focused on the individual employee, and structural and systemic changes are not enacted. So an enormous amount of work has to be done by the business community. Frankly, it's both astonishing and shameful that 8-9 years since that report, businesses have done so little. Finally, we have a gift for you, and it's this book that we put out last year. It's called Shared Waters. It was designed by Katie Wilhelm, a local Indigenous designer. Katie created the whole concept for it, and it's, as she says, it centers on what she calls our relationship to the local river and how our actions are a direct cause and effect have a direct cause and effect on the First Nations communities. So it highlights Indigenous businesses, and it highlights settler-led businesses that are somewhere on their journey to reconciliation, and you'll learn a little bit about where all of these businesses in here are on their journey. Some are early on, some are late stage, but it's a real opportunity to explore that. So thank you for bearing with me. I'd now like to introduce David. And David, as I'm sure a lot of folks in the room know, is a well-known business lawyer, trademark agent for Harris & Pensa. I've known him for many, many years. He focuses on technology issues and technology companies and leads the technology and privacy law and intellectual property practice at Harris and Pensa. Did Claude Pensa just pass?
Unfortunately, he just passed away.
Yeah, so, it's a very sad moment. I guess it was last night, the founder of the firm. A few days ago? Okay, I just saw it today. Anyway, wonderful firm rooted in history here in London. What David advises on is just incredible. I can't believe it. It's like software licenses, outsourcing agreements, consulting agreements, intellectual property, including trademarks, copyright, technology transfer, privacy, social media, anti-spam law, and of course, most importantly for us today, artificial intelligence law. Member of the Canadian Technology Law Association, co-author of a book, Legal Landmines in E-Commerce. He publishes a Tech Law Weekly blog, which I subscribe. You should subscribe. It's absolutely fantastic. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to David and step aside. Clear out my junk. There you go.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, good morning and welcome to the session. So we're going to talk today about AI, and I think the opening perspective is that artificial intelligence and the digital revolution that enabled it will be looked back on in the future as more significant than the Industrial Revolution. At the same time, it has some serious practical, legal, and ethical issues that we need to understand if we're going to use it properly. And there's a myriad of issues, and I'm going to focus on some of the issues that businesses should be aware of when they're using artificial intelligence. I'm going to try and keep this on a practical level. And if you want to learn more, as Graham mentioned, we have a Tech Law Weekly newsletter you can subscribe to. And we also have an AI ebook that we update from time to time that includes the blogs that I've written on the topic. Let's start with a show of hands. How many in here have actually used an AI tool of some sort? Just almost everybody. That's good. So has anybody here actually created an AI tool? Oh, a couple people. Okay, good. So we thought that since we're talking about artificial intelligence, it would be fitting if we used some of it in this presentation. So let me introduce you to Robot David.
I am Robot David. I am here to give Lawyer David some tips about artificial intelligence for businesses.
Oh, thanks. Can you do my presentation for me?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. But while you talk, I will show this slide with a QR code so people can sign up to your newsletter and download your AI ebook.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to have to do the presentation myself then. So to quote futurist Jim Carroll, and if you're at all interested in AI, you should follow Jim Carroll. The only thing we know about AI is that we don't know exactly where we're going, but we're making a really good time. So an AI will do some amazing things, but we need to take a measured, thoughtful approach to it. So the first question is, what is AI? First issue is it's not a passing fad. This is here to stay. It's been coming at us at an unprecedented rate of speed, and it's constantly changing and improving. ChatGPT is actually the fastest growing consumer app in internet history. It reached 100 million users in only 2 months. I think it took Facebook like 9 or 10 months or a year to do that. And ChatGPT it's not a year old yet. It only came out last fall. But AI has been in development for years, for a long time. And it's been used in the background. And you've all seen it, recommendation engines when you buy stuff on Amazon, when you listen to something on Spotify or watch something on YouTube. That's all driven by AI, and facial recognition to unlock our phones, that sort of stuff. But what ChatGPT and DALL-E and others did last fall was they brought this to the forefront. So it's things that we can all use. So we can all go into ChatGPT or other equivalents to it and have it write something for us. We can all go into DALL-E or Midjourney or any of those images, and we can have it create any image we want. And the technology is sometimes kind of crude, but it's continually improving. I mentioned Jim Carroll. He did a post yesterday that showed an image he did a year ago. And he did the same image now using the same prompts. The image a year ago was really crude. The image from yesterday looked like it was a photograph. It's amazing development in a year. And it seems like every tech company either has products available now or in development that will use AI in some shape or form. And sometimes that's just in the background, but sometimes it's more to the forefront. So what we call AI, it's really machine learning. It's not intelligent and it's not sentient. So DALL-E, for example, learns from a database of art and photographs. ChatGPT learns from a database of text and other written material. So AI writes based upon what it has read in these massive databases. It doesn't understand what it's reading. It doesn't understand what it's writing. And it doesn't really create anything. It just follows patterns that it's learned. So it's been described as a toddler in its output. I like to say that it's more like a parrot than it is Data from Star Trek. And there's a bunch of issues around how it's created, how it's used, that can affect businesses in real time. The first is the copyright in the learning material. So as you can imagine, it's learning from massive databases of whether it's text, computer code, photographs, paintings, whatever. And there's been a bunch of lawsuits started by artists and authors against some of these generative tools. And the issue is these tools didn't ask us if they could use all this stuff that we've created and that we own and we have copyright in to learn from. So is that a breach of copyright? And if it is a breach of copyright, do some of the fair use and fair dealing principles that are exceptions apply? We're not totally sure about that. And much art and other creative works is derivative. I mean, that's just how it works. When we create something, if we're an artist or a writer, we're often influenced by what came before, either what we did before, what other people did before. It's just the way things work. It's how creativity works. So, but does automating that, does that somehow turn that into high-tech plagiarism? And again, it's unclear. Now, it's interesting, Microsoft is working on some AI products that are an adjunct to the Office suite, and that they're going to be available soon. And they recently announced that if anybody uses those tools, and if by using those tools, you get sued by someone who claims that the database used their material, Microsoft will indemnify you for that. So you don't have to worry about being liable for that if you're using a Microsoft tool. Now, I understand that the country of Japan has actually made a policy decision that it basically won't enforce any copyrights against AI learning databases. So when it comes to the law that's around artificial intelligence, we're going to see it develop in part along interpretation of existing laws such as copyright, but we're also going to see some policy decisions made at the government levels. Another issue that's related to copyright is that many of the AI tools actually retain your input, and it uses that AI for training. So you have to be really careful of that, depending on what you're doing with the AI tools. For example, if you use it to review a document, it keeps that document. So that's not good if that document includes confidential or proprietary or private information. Or if the query you're making contains sensitive information. And that has a huge number of ramifications. I mean, if you're inventing something and you have to keep it private, does that amount to publication? There's going to be, that's important for patent issues. So some of these engines use and take this, and some don't. Some of the more specialized ones that are meant for specific industries don't. So you have to make sure that, first of all, don't put anything sensitive into it. But if you're going to do that, make sure you read the fine print of that particular tool to see what it says about what it retains and what it doesn't. That's important. There's another thing that relates to that is personality rights. So the current Hollywood writers and actors strike, one of the issues is about artificial intelligence. The writers are concerned that the studios are going to use AI to replace them to write everything from game shows to movies. The actors are concerned about what the studios are going to do with their images. I mean, we've already seen movies that use artificial intelligence to develop characters that are based on deceased actors from earlier movies in the series. Some of them look pretty convincing. Some of them are a bit uncanny, but it's done. In the recent Indiana Jones movie, they de-aged Harrison Ford for some of the scenes using artificial intelligence. Now, at the moment, it takes a lot of time and energy and skill to do this, but the tools are getting better and better all the time. So it's a serious issue. And I mean, a robot, David, is crude, but we did that quickly with a tool. It didn't cost us a penny. And so, that's what you can do, like from a quick and dirty. But the tools are out there, so you can take actual images of actual people, feed the text in. You can have it, there are tools that will mimic your voice. You put in clips and it will mimic your voice. So you can get to a stage where you can do a deep fake. You could do, if you really wanted to, you could do a deep fake of me on a video doing this, and it would look pretty convincing. So it's going to be really interesting, especially in the American election coming up, to see what abuses are done of these tools to have false images of people doing things. Now, the flip side of the copyright issue is that it's very clear, this is one of the few things that's clear in the laws around copyright, no one owns the output. So if you use AI to create some text, to create an image, to write some software, you don't own that. Nobody owns it. The law is very clear that the issue of ownership of creative works, which is generally around copyright issues, it can be around patents as well. It's all based on human activity and human creativity. So the courts and copyright offices around the world have made it very clear that if artificial intelligence created it, you can't get intellectual property protection. There was an instance a few years ago where a photographer set up a camera and this monkey came up and took some selfies. And there was an attempt, I think it was actually by PETA, to claim in the courts to say that the monkey owned that. And the courts were adamant that no, nobody owns that because it's not a human that took the picture. And There's been attempts to register copyright in the US of imagery that's been created using AI. And the US Copyright Office has made it very clear that it's not copyrightable. And where you're going to get to, it's kind of an interesting conundrum at law, because you have this notion that we know that anything created by AI is not subject to ownership and copyright. Anything that's created by a human is. So where's that middle line where you put sufficient skill and creativity into it so that it's yours? Or is it go down the route that, well, this part of it is based on human creativity, so this is, you can protect, but you can't protect this? It's going to be really difficult. So my advice to anybody who's using AI to create something, if you want to own it, well, you may not, but at the very least, keep copious notes of what you did and what efforts you put into it, because that's going to be relevant. So there's also an issue around privacy. I alluded to that a couple minutes ago. So to the extent that AI databases train on databases with personal information in it, there's a privacy problem. So, make sure you consider this when you're inputting queries into an AI tool. If you're putting people's names in there, it might be keeping that personal information. So, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada would not be happy about that. The privacy commissioners in various countries have taken notice of this issue. An example in Canada, a couple years ago, Clearview AI, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Clearview AI, but it's a company that what they did was they scraped images of our faces off of wherever we put them out there. So it could be on websites, social media, wherever. And they created this massive database saying, oh, that's David, And so what they did, their business model was to sell this to police forces. So if the police happen to catch our picture on a camera someplace, and it could be just a street camera walking down the street, they could use the Clearview AI database and match it up and go, oh, yeah, that was David who was in front of that beer store at this time of the, and oh, it was robbed about that time, so we've got to look at David. So the Canadian Privacy Commissioner and others around the world have said, no, we didn't, when we put our images online, we didn't consent to be in a 24/7 police lineup. So a lot of countries have banned it. Clearview AI is adamant that they're okay, and they're still doing it in the US to some extent. But that's the kind of issue that comes up. Another issue to be concerned about with AI is, we talked about it being a toddler and being like a parrot, is AI hallucinations. AI text output sounds convincing and it sounds confident, but it's notoriously inaccurate and unreliable. Some people have described AI text output as confident bullshit, and that really is what it is. So it seems like it lowers writing to the level of a supermarket tabloid. And even Google suffered from it. When they introduced one of their products, it asked them a question about the James Webb Telescope, and it got the answer completely wrong. This was when they were demoing the product for the first time. One thing you should all try and do, I've tried it a couple of times, it's rather amusing, is go into ChatGPT or one of those alternatives to it and ask it to create a CV of yourself. I think you'll find that amusing. For me, it got maybe 2/3 of it right, but a third of it was like, no, that's completely wrong. There was an instance in the United States, I think it was New York, a few months ago, where there was a lawyer used, I think it was ChatGPT, to create a case brief to submit to the court. So, when a lawyer submits a case brief to the court, the other lawyers on the other side, you look at the brief and you look at the case law. And if there's something you don't recognize, you dispatch the students and the juniors to look up these cases and find out, how this fits. Are they arguing right? Whatever. Well, they discovered that 5 of the cases in the brief didn't exist. The AI completely made them up. They sounded convincing. They even used real judges' names from real courts, but they were completely and totally made up and false. So needless to say, that lawyer got into a bit of trouble by the judge. And I suspect the lawyer didn't do it intentionally, but he just didn't know any better. So you really can't trust what it's putting out at all. And there's actually, I don't know if there's been any defamation lawsuits started, but there's actually been some threatened over false things that AI has said about people. So, given all these issues, it's inevitable that we'll get some AI regulations. There are, AI has been around as a concept for 20 years or more, and there are dozens of ethical standards that you can search and look up. These ethical standards seem to have a bunch of common threads to them. They talk about algorithmic transparency, which is the need to be able to understand how it makes its decisions. And part of that is there's a huge embedded bias situation, garbage in, garbage out. So if it's learning on a database that has biased information, it's going to parrot that and create that. Again, I shouldn't use the word create because, like I said, it doesn't create, but it's going to regurgitate that. So that's a huge issue. And with lots of AI, nobody knows how it reaches its answers. So that's a huge issue. There's issues of fairness, responsibility, trust, privacy, confidentiality. But these are common threads that are in these. The European Union, there's a proposed Artificial Intelligence Act in the works that will deal with a lot of this stuff. In Canada, Bill C-27 came out a few months ago. And that bill will, when it's enforced, replace PIPEDA, the federal privacy law, with a new one. But it also includes a proposed Artificial Intelligence and Data Act that will govern AI. Now, the problem is the act itself is very high level. It doesn't say much. And it's only going to impact or affect high impact systems, whatever that means. We're not totally sure what that means. The meat of it is going to be one of two things is going to happen. Either they'll pull that out from the privacy legislation and pass the privacy legislation on its own and fix that, or perhaps they'll pass it with the privacy legislation and then get the regulations done afterwards. Now, the Canadian government has published their thoughts on what the issues are that they're going to do the regulations on. And they also announced just recently they're working on an interim voluntary AI guideline. I don't know why they just don't get at the regulations, but that's what they're working on. So that's going to be an important thing going forward. And maybe it's in part because the AI guidelines, while they're not enforceable or won't be enforceable, they will apply to everything, not just whatever the high impact system thing is. And the US government has recently published some proposed AI guidelines. So there's a lot of attention to it at the government level. Now, personally, one of the things that concerns me is that, and this is just my humble opinion, but I've found that the courts, particularly in Canada, typically get tech issues right. The legislators, not so much. They always tend to mess up legislation, as far as I'm concerned, that affect tech. AI is much more complicated in the legal issues than other forms of tech have been, so I'm not holding my breath for them to pass legislation that actually makes a lot of sense, but we'll see. So the last issue I want to talk about before we get to our panel is, should you as businesses have an AI policy? And I think you should. So, you may want to just control how your employees use AI tools. Or if you're creating your own AI tools, there's some other issues to deal with. But it's inevitable that most businesses will use some AI tools at some point. And I'll bet there's a high probability of, even if you think you don't use them, you've got some employees out there who have used them. And so you want to make sure that you use these tools properly. And you want to make sure that rogue use by employees who don't understand these issues don't get you into trouble. So if you're going to do an AI policy for your business, it would cover some of the issues I've mentioned, like the database use, the copyright, ownership, privacy, all those issues. And you may, for example, like some companies have said, hey, if we create anything using AI, we're going to somehow watermark it or label it because we think that's the right thing to do. And if you're going to create any AI products, you really have to dig into these AI ethical issues and look at the potential AI regulation, because you don't want to, and while those are under development, you don't want to create a tool and then get a couple years down the road and go, oops, we have to fundamentally redesign this because it's not going to fly at law. So I'm going to leave that here, and I'd invite the panelists up to join me. So Christina and Simon, if you'd, so, yeah. Okay, so I will let Christina and Simon introduce themselves, and then there are some questions that I'm going to ask, or actually Robot David will ask, and then we can open it up to general questions and discussions from the floor. Christina?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Christina Fox. I'm the CEO at TechAlliance of Southwestern Ontario. We work with the most promising startups and fastest growing technology companies in the region through support, like advising, experiences bringing people together for meetups and that kind of thing. It's a real pleasure to join all of you this morning and to be with you, David and Simon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Christina. My name's Simon Trevarthen. Trust me, it's a horrible name. Just call me Simon. It's much easier for you and me. I'm the Chief Innovation and Open Asset Officer for Fanshawe College. And we're actually building an innovation center. It's called Innovation Village, which is designed to be a place for creative collaborations between industry, students, and faculty to further this technology issues, but also other kind of social innovation in the community. I'm also connected to the chamber, and hopefully we'll be on the board very soon, announcement. So glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this discussion. But first of all, let's ask.
Thanks.
Whoops. There's a bit of a delay here.
When we think about artificial intelligence, we think about large language models like ChatGPT.
Oh, sorry.
Tech can be a finicky thing.
It can be.
Thanks, David.
There.
I do have some questions. First question to Christina and Simon. What are your thoughts on the question of whether AI is merely another useful tool we can all use, or whether it is an existential threat that threatens mankind?
Okay, useful tool or existential threat?
I mean, I think it can be both. I'm more on the side of useful tool. When we think of adoption in Canada, about 4% of SMEs are using it each and every day. So I'm a firm believer that with the rise of use of AI, we will see greater productivity and creativity for human beings. When I think of the godfather of AI, who is a Canadian and began working and leading some of Canada's efforts back in the 80s and 90s, Jeffrey Hinton, he recently left Google so that he could operate autonomously from a corporation and actually begin to speak out. He spoke this year at Collision Conference, which is the largest technology conference in the world and is hosted in Toronto. And he talked about a couple of major themes related to AI and spoke about the sixth one when he spoke about was the existential threat of AI and warfare. So, I mean, there are ways to be looking at doomsday, but really I think what we're interested in talking about today is application for you and your business, how you're moving forward with business, how you're developing policy, how you're understanding punitive nature of AI use, but also unlocking human potential and being able to do the kinds of things that we might not have been able to do. Might be dialing into it too far, but when I think of the dawn of internet, would any of us say, oh, I'd rather go back to pre-internet days when you can carry that computer in your hand? So we're at the beginning stages. When we talk about the infancy of AI or a toddler, there's temper tantrums and there's going to be misuse, and how we actually operate within our businesses to determine how to coach and grow that toddler into that forming, norming, storming teenager and into actual application. So I think we'll dial into more of that, but I sit firmly in with good understanding and unlocking boundaries with people in business. It can be a really strong opportunity for the growth and prosperity.
Right. So I'm a child of the late 80s, early 90s, and every hairstyle required hairspray at that time. The clothes was bad, and every song seemed to involve like electronic music. The debate at that time was robotics, how robots would take over all manufacturing and every production line would disappear. And that's partially true. We no longer have production lines with tens of thousands of people working on, but there's still robotics plants in Cambridge and nearby us still producing cars. The fact is we learned to absorb this technology and transform with it. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a double-edged sword. I mean, as David mentioned, there's potential threats to democracy with, deep fakes and who really said what, and there's threats to academic integrity. Mm-hmm. There's threats in other kind of pieces around privacy. But I also think there's opportunities around revenue and changing businesses for the better, but also complex systems. Many of our organizations, healthcare, you name it, social systems require complex systems, and I think AI can actually augment and improve those systems.
Thanks for your insights. I don't think I'm Skynet, but would I tell you if I was? How should a typical business start thinking about how they might use AI to their advantage?
You want to start?
Sure. So I'm of the opinion that you can think of it in two forms, right? This is based on my reading around with McKinsey. One way is to think about it in terms of productivity. So a lot of these tools can actually boost productivity for individuals, for teams, collaboration, particularly also knowledge management. Data and knowledge management is really critical, and I think that can help teams glue together. But it's also productivity in terms of how we can actually use sources for different experiences. So one of the projects we're involved in is using AI tied to agricultural machinery, so that rather than spraying an entire field with pesticide, you can use the AI and the sensors at the back of the vehicle to detect where the weed or the invasive plant is and spray the individual plant rather than just basically coating the field. And so I think that's an example of where a business can gain productivity, efficiency gains, but also in that case, environmental gains too. And the other side of that is not just the productivity inside the organization, but I also think the revenue side as well. And the opportunities to better serve customers. So you can more intelligently understand what their needs are. We all have common rights, but we have unique needs. And we can deliver services more uniquely designed for them rather than more generic kind of offerings.
I really like the examples that you gave of, within the business and outside the business and how that can relate. I'm going to sort of take a twist with ChatGPT, riffing a little bit off of what you were talking about earlier, David, with what you put into this system and where the data then goes. So ChatGPT as a tool within your team can be a really easy editing tool. How do I say this differently, or edit this paragraph for greater synthesis, or add more language for this to be a better description of such and such. Lots of easy use. And I would encourage that in workplaces. What is the risk, though, is when you put sensitive information in. So, for example, true example, a colleague of mine worked in a multinational where they'd had some budgetary cuts, and so copywriting was a little bit skinnier in the budget line, and there was some discussion about, well, let's just throw it in ChatGPT and we'll just build a campaign based on what we can put in for this product launch that was really sensitive. And it was the lack of knowledge of understanding when you put that data in, it no longer is private information and can be sourced with the very next person that might be asking the same thing. So it's about thinking about in your workplace, or whether there's policy development, what can you use the tool for and what's really not encouraged for use of the tool, because you could be giving up trade secrets, you could be giving up information about product launch to competitors just based on the information that you're using. So while it might be a free and accessible tool, the use of it within your team is really important. And so I would encourage that the creativity that can come from using ChatGPT as a tool is helpful for your staff, whether there's writer block or a different way of approaching a problem, but just being thoughtful about where that data is going. It's like you're just putting it on the street to say, hey, have a look at this. Might not be that quick for people to get to that data, but the truth is you're actually putting your data in a place where it is accessible to a lot of other people. And so while it's cost effective to use the tool, it's important to be thinking about how it shouldn't be substituted just yet. The data that we have, as David shared, was, there's instances where what is output is not actually accurate. So how are you actually working with information that you receive to verify the accuracy, and does it actually depict the things that you want to be saying? And so for that reason, that's a really specific example of how to use in business and how to safeguard what's important to your business when you're using it sort of a day-to-day. But I love the examples that you gave, because it allows us to actually have that the thinking around what could innovation do, how does it actually push us into the next industrial or evolution, and how quickly are we going to actually get to outputs and outcomes that are good for humanity, good for business, and drive revenue.
Just to add to that, I think one of the concerns around AI generally is that, particularly when we talk about the ChatGPT, which is the thin end of the wedge, is the concern that they're going to attack white-collar jobs.
Right.
Much technology is about replacing blue-collar jobs, and the concern is around white-collar jobs and the knowledge economy. And I think to those points is really thinking about the tier of knowledge in your organization. Privacy information, personal information. It may be useful for kind of the general kind of everyday stuff, but that privacy, I was telling with my colleagues at the college, if a student's using these tools, how can we use tools to understand that they've just put the question, the exam question, into a tool and it's just spit out an answer? So again, there's a bit of an arms race to understand where people are defrauding systems. But as David said, can it be used for legal advice? Probably not. Can it be used for low-level interactions? Probably yes. And so I think those kind of caveats. But understanding there is a hockey puck to this technology. And I think, as David mentioned, I think Facebook took 2 years to get to 100 million users. It did it in a few months. So it is a tool out there. We have to embrace it. The question is, how can we embrace it? And I think around productivity in our organizations, not necessarily some of those more complex interactions.
Well, even if you think of like a customer experience, so a customer success manager might be using something that's a chatbot or some kind of a virtual assistance, when you think of planning your trip to Disney World, or when you're interacting with Google Maps, the ease to which you have an interface that helps you get the answers you need. Now, some of us have made a phone call and or gone on a chatbot, and you just get into the loop of like, this isn't working for me, it's a terrible experience. But for the most part, as those tools are tested and reinforced and reiterated, it becomes a better and better experience. So it's, we see AI is very ubiquitous in our everyday experience. It's how do we take that knowledge and apply it to the demands that you might have in your business for greater productivity, revenue driving, and really just your reach.
Okay. I think we have one more question.
When we think about artificial intelligence, we think about large language models like ChatGPT, image generators like DALL-E and Midjourney. And my favorite, Canva, where I live. Those tools are top of mind because they are publicly available and we can all relate to them. But they are the tip of the AI iceberg. What are other uses of AI that businesses should consider?
Sorry about that, Robot David, or David Robot. We did jump the gun on that question. Yeah, I feel like I gave a couple of great examples. I'm curious for the both of you, and then maybe opening up.
Yeah, maybe the question should be, there's a gazillion AI tools out there.
Right.
How does a business go about finding the tools that relate to them and that they can use? Is there any thoughts on that? Or is it just a matter of Google searches to find the tools you want and figuring it out from there and talking to peers? Is there any?
I think it depends on the business question. I think around collaboration, I think it's great for collaboration tools. I think it's great for understanding insights coming from data sets around customers and what they mean, understanding trends, pulling out trends. I think the real interesting pieces is more of the machine learning, the deeper learning around predictive analytics, understanding patterns and seeing where the trends in your marketplace may be going. And I think that could be used in a small business, but also in large systems. I mean, think of our healthcare system. I've done some work in healthcare. A lot of our institutions are built around a reactive model. When you get a disease, we solve the problem. And we know that many people who have health needs, it can be the result of aging, but also can be the result of chronic disease and chronic disease management. So how do we use predictive tools to really understand of the entire group of patients which potentially has a greater risk and needs to move forward and have additional care? So I think the predictive analytics is really something that is helpful to serve people and serve customers, but also in that case, patients better. And I think that's where the strength of these tools may lie, in the predictive.
I think from my perspective, we're seeing almost, like I said earlier, we're seeing almost every tech company is creating some sort of AI tool. So keep your eyes open on what they're doing. See what's in your space. And yeah, don't be afraid of doing some Google searches, following like people like, follow people like Jim Carroll who are futurists and get their take on it. So I think if you do that and try and bring that back into what pain point you could solve in your business or what you could do better in your business and go out and search for the tools. I mean, they're changing all the time. I'll give you an example of a tool that I use. It's based on artificial intelligence. It's a trademark search tool. So it used to be that I was searching a trademark for registration for a client. I'd do searching one of two ways. I'd go into the trademarks database myself and do some searching because you need to make sure there's nothing confusingly similar that's already there. In some cases, you would actually engage a third-party search house who was able to do deeper searches, broader searches than I can possibly do. So to do that, the cost is anywhere from $500 to $1,000 or more, and it takes about 3 days to get the results. And back in the world of paper, those things used to be out this thick, and I'd have to spend an hour or two going through them. Within about the last year, there's a new search tool created by a lawyer out of Toronto called Hello. I can go on their site, I can input my search parameters and my use description. About a minute later, I get the results. And that search cost me roughly $35. And it supposedly is just as good as that $1,000 search that takes 3 days. And so it raises some interesting questions because it's like, okay, it's a no-brainer that I use this for clients instead of the other because it saves them a ton of money. But my time, you have to factor that in as well. I still have to review this search. I still have to spend the same amount of time reviewing it. But at what point does a professional become negligent if you're not using these tools? And if I'm doing old school and spending all kinds of time doing something manually versus using an AI tool that's faster, cheaper, and better. So that's another issue that we're all going to have to struggle with going forward. So anybody have any questions? If you want to come up to the microphone here and we are recording this though, so we appreciate if you would. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's Judy Smith from Marsh. And I was just curious about, the example you just gave, doing searches. Would you worry in the back of your mind that if, you're resting that search and somebody from that law firm who created that, app or tech, might be looking at what you're looking at and trying to jump in and get that trademark done, before you? That's
Yeah.
one question. The other question is, are you seeing any cases in Europe yet that have gone to court where there's little fights that might be precedent setting? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So the first question is a good one. And I think what you'll find is that any service that's offering a specific tool will know that people are concerned about that. And they will have terms of use that say, like, don't worry, we won't do this. And if they did it, they wouldn't last very long. So again, you have to look at each tool and look at the terms of use and see how they do that. And yes, the European Union does tend to get ahead of the curve on things tech, and they tend to go a little farther on things tech, sometimes, as far as I'm concerned, too far. We've seen, I'm not sure on the litigation side, but I know that there's been some European privacy commissioners have taken a really deep interest in some of this stuff. Yeah. As opposed to, and Canada's up there, and of course in the US, privacy isn't really a thing down there, so, it's still very much the Wild West there with that sort of thing. Okay,
So I'm really interested in just building what some of the things that David said about how you combine tools like AI with other technological developments. And so one of the things I'm really deeply interested in is digital twins, where you literally create an exact digital replica of this room. I mean, you literally can look in the trash can over there. You can literally, it's an exact replica. Imagine one of those walkthroughs you get on a real estate website, but imagine that on steroids. Right? I mean, literally, it's an exact. And the value of that from a productivity and an operations side, it has immense opportunities to, let's say, redesign a production line without ever taking the production line offline. So if you wanted to replace machine 16, you can model replacing it with a new machine and see flows and see your production. You can also collaborate, if you're in a multinational across the world, to redesign that production line here around the world. The other thing is you can actually see, again, the ultimate thing around business is bringing value to the marketplace, and part of that is cutting your costs. So a lot of digital twins have actually, let's imagine there's a big factory, it's got lots of pipes on top, and then it's, all the challenges with that, where the drone literally takes off, and the drone is just the vehicle. It's the sensors in it that matter. The drone takes off every 2 days and flies around the roof, and it can sense minute blistering on pipes that could potentially cause damage and corrosion. So that, tied with AI, starts giving you an intelligent view of your business, particularly with acute operations. Imagine that with pipelines and those kinds of things. You need to understand not just is the thing going to burst, but getting the predictive, rolling the carpet back and saying there may be a challenge here. So I think those kind of uses is something that a business can use. Obviously, there's a cost to that, but there's also an operational saving. There's also savings using those digital twins in terms of sustainability, understanding all of the sensors in your building and optimizing your energy costs to run a complex plant. So again, another valuable use, I think, from a productivity side.
There's some interesting uses on the human resources side, too. There was a study in the US not too long ago that had asked the question of people who are about to graduate university, would they use AI tools to help them generate their resumes and their cover letters and their applications? And something like half said yes, they would. But if you ask they also asked the HR professionals what they thought about that, and they thought that was just a horrible thing. Like, no, they can't do that. And my first thought when I saw that was, wait a minute, what's wrong with someone using these tools to create these their resume or their cover letters. And there's, as long as they're keeping it truthful, it shouldn't be a problem. And, the job applicants have this problem that people who are hiring have all these algorithms that they're feeding it through to cut people out. So they're trying to use tools to beat the algorithms. So there's that going on. But then the flip side of it is you look at it from the hiring side and you say, wait a minute, we know you use these tools to vet these people before you even look at these resumes. So you're using it, so why can't they use it? And then if you're using it, how do we know that there's not some embedded bias or problems or other things in there? So it's really quite fascinating when you see the two different sides of that butt heads on it. Yeah. Did I see another question back there?
David, you mentioned that businesses should consider doing policies. Are businesses doing policies? I mean, are businesses even aware, perhaps, that their staff is using AI?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I've got a couple of instances of one in particular I'm thinking of now where a client came to me a few months ago and said it was a client that had a lot of stuff that was tech and they protected it by trade secrets and stuff like that. They were deathly afraid that one of its designers or engineers was going to do something like this. So, we created an AI policy for that company to deal with that issue so that their people would know enough not to do that. I don't think there's enough awareness over it. There's, some of the tech companies that are providing the tools have AI policies to give their customers some comfort, but I don't think it's on the radar screen of enough businesses, and I think it's something that should be. Another thing I think, to take that one step farther, I think, and some of the futurists are saying we're going to get there, but I think that we need a situation where, large companies in particular, they have compliance departments and they have privacy officers and stuff. I think that where we should head is to have a new kind of CEO, a chief ethical officer. And that role is going to be dealing with not just, like privacy was an issue that's early on in this, but not just to deal with that, but to deal with these issues of AI and how we should use this and how we shouldn't use this. So I think there's a growing need for that, but I think there's a real education process that's needed with companies to understand that they really should be dealing with this and putting some policies in place to make sure that at the very least they don't have employees going rogue and getting them into trouble.
I would maybe add to that, what we do know is in Canada, it is an outbalanced use of AI, and it's generally, AI tools are used in firms of more than 100 employees. And so in the case that you were speaking about, David, setting a policy for staff because you might not have closeness to projects that everybody's working on, but I think it does start with education. Like, do you have awareness? Do you speak about AI and AI tools in project teams? The development of policy is probably going to be needed, especially at the larger scale, but how does that impact, just taking a look at the members that are in this room, how does that impact your business? If you're in a small, medium enterprise, you may not have a dialogue already about use and not use. Some people will trim it right down to, we encouraged kids, I'm going to age myself, if you couldn't spell something, you had to go get the dictionary and figure it out. Or if you needed to substitute a word in, you'd use the thesaurus, and we encourage that. So how are we looking at this tool as an encouragement of, again, creativity and productivity, but within what bounds? So conversation and knowledge seeking is really important because this is moving fast, it's going to move faster, and it's better for all of you that are here today, you're taking a step in the right direction of informing yourselves, beginning to think about how does this impact our business, our customer, our supply chain, what's the further implication, and have those conversations within your team, within your executive team, to be thinking about, are we at a point where there should be policy development depending on the product and service that we might offer in market.
I mean, I think the common theme is being clear about quality control of information decisions, and vigilance. Just because ChatGPT spits back an answer doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
And that's the quality control piece. And I think that's the vigilance. I have seen, I mean, the other thing we've just come through is a pandemic. And many small businesses have moved online. Even they may have a storefront, they've moved online. They've shifted how they deliver their services. And I've seen many small businesses use these tools to better understand and gain insights about their customer base, really understand the profile and how they can appeal to them. But it's insights, not evidence. And I think there's a clear distinction between the two. And I think if you're going to make it as a business leader, as an entrepreneur, understand that these are insights in your business. And as I think, as David mentioned, you still have to do that due diligence to say, is that accurate? And I think, we all do this, but would you do it based on purely this? Would you make a legal decision based on what because after all, it's scraping. Mm-hmm. It's an algorithm scraping. The algorithm will improve and learn based on its iterative, but it's still scraping. There isn't a judgment piece to it.
Another thing to keep in mind about AI policy is that, yes, this stuff can be very complicated, and it's changing and morphing, and it may vary very much on what your business is doing, but don't consider it to be cast in stone. You can start with something that covers, the basic immediate issues that you might have, knowing that this policy, you're going to have to revisit this, at whatever frequency makes sense for you and update it. But at least you get your people thinking about it, and hopefully that, stopping the rogue employee from doing something that hurts you, and getting your mindset like the right way to move forward in the way that works best for you.
I'm going to ask a follow-up because you're speaking to the Chamber of Commerce. 80% of our members employ fewer than 25 people, right? So one of the issues for small businesses that we find right across the country is they don't have access to proper HR advice. Mm-hmm. And right now there are dozens and dozens of companies that offer outsourced HR, as an example. Tax advice, this advice, that advice. So I get that particularly a tech business, somebody who's generating the tools, would have some understanding of what to do, what policies. But what does a small business person do? How do they protect themselves and their staff? And that's, I guess, what I'm really. What would you say to them? Because most of the people listening to you are going to be in that category. And it's like, good Lord, I need to do this. How on God's name am I going to develop this policy?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're using tools like outsourced tools to do this, it comes down to asking them the right questions, and how do you make these decisions, and how does it, if you use AI, and how does that work? If you want to create a policy, I mean, you can always ask me, and I can help. But you've got to think about the tools. I've actually, if you download my ebook, one of the blog posts that is in there actually talks about AI policies and why you would have them and what you might put in them. So you might, at a first step, take a look at that and get some thoughts on that.
I was mountain biking on the weekend. I took a tumble. So I would love to have an AI that was like an Evel Knievel AI saying, you won't make that jump. And with autonomous vehicles and all the rest of it, you could imagine those kinds of programs being in place. But when I got home, and what did I do? I used Dr. Google to see what my symptoms were and to try and understand, should I go to the hospital or not, knowing full well there's a long wait at various hospitals, ER. And I think we all use those tools. We all use those tools, and they inform our decision, but they don't make our decision. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key distinction. A lot of these decisions in it can inform to the question of HR. It can, if you have a complex HR issue, it will inform the questions you may be asked, but it doesn't make the questions you ask. And I think you might still consult an HR lawyer to make those complex decisions.
Yeah, one of the issues that I had a good chat with one of my colleagues who does labor or human resources law. And it was interesting because there's a number of things that, especially in Canada, you can't ask of a potential employee, right? And there's things you can't base your decisions on when you're hiring. So if you're using an AI-based tool, how do you know to help you with those decisions and it's ranking applicants? How do you know whether it's ranking them based on some of those things you're not supposed to ask? And it's an interesting conundrum because as an applicant, if you get rejected, you won't know. Like you won't, the answer will be, oh, well, this other person just seemed more suited to our needs. We thought they were, their background was closer, or we thought they were a better fit. They'll never say, well, yeah, because we considered this thing that human rights legislation doesn't allow us to consider. But it's going to be interesting to see if at some point, whether it's in Canada or someplace else, there isn't some kind of a lawsuit, whether it's an individual lawsuit or class action, saying, wait a minute, you used one of these tools and it had embedded bias and it kicked me out and it shouldn't have. It's going to be interesting. So we just don't know where that is headed.
It is the unknown. What we can predict today could be happening already. And to stay informed, I think, is one of the key pieces for how you're operating within your business of are you spending time browsing content? Are you spending time thinking about applications to your business model and continuing to consult with others who are also seeking some of the same information? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Great discussions. Thanks, Graham, for keeping us in mind as small business leaders. I have a question for Simon and Christina and, of course, Dave. Now, Simon, I'm a student as well as an executive at a small company here in London. And just a long story short, one of our group assignments, we figured that they used ChatGPT in a financial accounting course. And obviously, the answer was incorrect. So I want to know how executives can really trust these tools to make business decisions. I'm a big advocate for ChatGPT like Christina, but seeing that, it really put a strain on me personally, and I see that we do need to put policies in place for younger workers. And I say younger because those are the ones that would use this without a doubt. So, question to you from an academia perspective, and how can businesses protect themselves even further, onboarding a lot of the younger folks coming in to the workforce?
Great question. I think what the answer to that, though, is that you can never wait till all the facts are in to make a decision because the opportunity is already passed. So we all make decisions on partial information. The question is, what are those pieces of partial information? And I think to your example, relying on that to come up with a financial result is relying on it maybe too much because the result is wrong. So again, that's that diligence and saying it sounds a useful insight, is it factually true? And so I think disaggregating facts from what ChatGPT spits out is going to be the key piece. I think the challenge is that, yes, you're right, maybe generationally, there's a generation that says it's an answer. It's on Google. It's an answer, right? And that's not necessarily true. So I think, again, I think we all know that you can't rely on these kinds of sources of information to make a decision. I think in the academic frame of mind is having rigorous tools around thinking about how we actually understand academic integrity. Did the student do the work, or did they just feed a question into the machine? And I think there is tools that can help reverse engineer, understand whether let's say the essay submitted is true. But I think, and there's going to be a bit of an arms race in terms of how that works. But fundamentally, it comes down to an ethical question, right? Which is, if you're going to submit work that you're claiming the IP over, which is your academic essay, is true and is yours, then that's an ethical question that you take accountability for if you're found to be in fault. But I think that the disaggregating what is an insight versus a fact is the key denominator there.
And if I can add to that, I mean, it's about fact checking. So it's the same thing as you Google search something, or you go onto YouTube and you say, oh, I want a video of somebody doing something, whatever it is. You know that when you search something on Google, you're going to find some sources that are credible and are giving you decent answers. And you're going to find some sources that are just plain wrong. And, you know, we've gotten so that we can, well, not everybody can do this, but most of us can sort of pick those out, say, oh, well, that's a recognized institution, or, you know, that's coming from a professor at Fanshawe, so it's, you know, it's got some cred to it, as opposed to somebody else. And, you know, I'll bet almost everybody here has gone onto YouTube and said, I wonder how I do this. And you found videos that you watch and you go, oh, like, no, that's not how you do it. Just a couple of days ago, the battery went on the key fob to my car. And I looked at it and went, I'm not sure how to open this. I'll search on YouTube so I don't break it when I open it. And I found, the first video I found, the guy was prying it apart with a screwdriver and stuff, and I thought, oh, this doesn't look right to me. And the second one, it was like, oh no, you just push this little button and it pops off. I'm thinking, like, yeah, like the first guy didn't know what he was talking about, and if you follow his advice, you're probably going to break the multi-$100 key fob. But the other solution was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I needed to know where that button was to push to open it. So I think, you know, the text-based AI stuff is kind of the same thing. You have to fact check it. So if, you know, I do encourage you to do the CV on yourself, so you can see that if you do that, if you're checking somebody else out, make sure you don't just rely on that. You want to at least fact check some of that stuff and just be a little wary and be careful of what you're doing with that information.
I'm going to add to it. It's a great question, Ahad, for both the academic and as an executive. On YouTube, try TikTok next time, David, because you might find a better solution for that fob. Right? Or a worse one. For me, when I think about use in workplaces, and people have, you know, asked this question, what you do want is open, transparent culture in your workplace. What you don't want is for someone to be using a tool like ChatGPT because they feel like they might be incompetent, or they're not sure what the answer is and they're using a source. But it's about insight versus being informed, and having an open culture about when could a tool like that be used, I think is really the base. And I'll give a great example. We had someone on our team, on my current team, that wrote a really lovely note in a card. And I said, oh, that's just the loveliest note I've ever seen. And the person said, oh, I got it on ChatGPT. We had a good chuckle. But it was the idea of, like, in a technology organization, we could actually talk about using technology for something as simple as, you know, wishing someone the very best as they're departing. But we could talk about that, and we could have a chuckle about it because we have an open dialogue about how and when could we be using a tool. And being in a technology organization, of course we're going to try different things. Of course we're going to encourage that innovation and creativity. And we're going to enjoy one another's creative approach when we're using a tool that makes us sound better in a going away card. But the key is to ask those questions. And if somebody is talking about the insight that they received from a Google search or ChatGPT or else, you know, even Canva, you think of some of the creative that can come from a tool like Canva, and acknowledging the use of the tool, and then having discussions about when is that best applicable in the workplace and when is it not. So what you do want is open transparency. What you don't want is people feeling like, when they declare use of a tool, that they're somehow incompetent. that if we're talking about it being a way to gain insight versus the fact check, and then what are the things that we do within our workplaces on a degree of what's important, what's not important, of if this is something important that's going to impact a product launch, or if this is something that is going to be related to our advisory committee, understanding the path to market, or in a technology organization, how does this actually accelerate change and innovation that could be highly disruptive for the good? If we're asking those questions along the way, and if you have that transparent and supportive culture, then I think that you can get around what might be uncomfortable conversations. And just then being in support of when data comes in that's not accurate, talking about what are the other measures that we need to use as an organization to be safe for ourselves, our customers, and in the space that we play in.
Yeah, I think another, another issue that kind of ties to this is that when a lot of people hear about AI, the first question is it going to replace me? Is it going to take my job? And we were talking about this earlier, and Simon's point of perspective, which was a really good one, was that for the first time we're seeing technology eat into white-collar jobs instead of blue-collar jobs. Long term, yeah, it may take some people's jobs, but there's going to be other jobs being created. And there's some people that think that, well, AI won't replace a lawyer, but a lawyer who uses AI might replace a lawyer who doesn't use AI. And I think that's kind of where we're probably headed with this stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then you have to, like Christina says, you have to be open and honest with that, with your staff and yourself and your business going forward.
Well, I think, there will always be the fear-mongering of automation, robotics, taking away jobs, but it also, think about the potential it unlocks. And we say this to our kids, you don't know what the jobs that are going to be available in 5 or 10 years from now. So when we say to our kids, you've got to figure out what you want to be for the rest of your life, well, the idea is that might not have even been designed. And so with job loss and productivity, we are truly unlocking even more potential.
I mean, for me, I think the really exciting part of this is the machine learning and that end of the question. It is about the autonomous vehicles potentially and how that rolls out, but those kinds of pieces of systems and machines that start learning from the data, so we can have plants automation much more rigorous, and actually you can have a huge plant maybe run by a few people. Right. There are a few examples in London already of that. So to my mind, that's where you can actually see the greatest benefit. And those kind of complex systems, right? The ethical questions, is when does this intersect with kind of human needs? And I think that's always the rub, and making these decisions around your life. But I think when it comes to automation, operations, there's huge potential of using those pieces. So you don't necessarily need someone driving that vehicle or need someone operating that piece of machinery, because the system can do it better. And by the way, it can get smarter at it and make adjustments on the fly as it gets smarter. So I think that's the distinction to draw.
Yeah, and I think another issue on that is that, we think of displacing people, but we've got a real serious issue in that the workforce is aging, and there's huge amounts of people that are retiring and about to retire. And unfortunately, in some jobs, there's not a lot of younger people stepping up to do that. So, in a perfect utopian world, AI would help sort of replace or enhance those jobs that people are retiring from, and as opposed to sort of taking work away from people who still are able to and want to do it. So there's a lot of subtle nuances and possibilities around that aspect of it too.
Hello. I just wanted to make sure that you had touched at the beginning that there's good and bad, just like any innovation. And my humble opinion, again, like we've done historically, we hold the people that use it improperly accountable. But for instance, we talked about the voice. You can deepfake voices and stuff like that. Let's not forget that it was actually created for people that are losing their speech so that they can record and continue to communicate with their world, hearing their own voice as well as their loved ones. That's why it was created. There's a lot of innovation that's coming out of wonderful hearts, and sure, unfortunately, there's a bad seed to humanity that may use that for other things. So to us as small business owners, those that are trying to innovate from good hearts, always look to it and how you can make your worlds, your little hubs of life, better for you, your customers, your employees. And I love the fact, like I'm neurodivergent, I have ADHD. I can use AI to take my thoughts and make them more concise, more professional. I'm blessed to be a part-time professor at Fanshawe. They use paraphrasing, so they come not knowing how to properly communicate at times, they're learning. So that iteration of paraphrasing, we're still figuring out how you can use it within submitting a report. So I just want to make sure that don't shy away from it. Find out how you can use it within your worlds to make you more competitive, set your employees up for success. But to your point, we also have to put those rails in to say, you found a great point. I had a bit of vulnerability there. How can we use it? Where do we use it? Where don't we use it? It's just learning how to, be a better part of what we do. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And I think from your perspective as a business owner, business operator, you're not going to solve these big ethical issues, right? But what you can do is exactly that. You can decide how you can use these tools for good, and how best it works for you, and along the way, try not to do something evil or mess it up, right? So, it's a massive, complicated issue that, you could talk about, you could talk about it for hours, but you've got to, from your business perspective, there's some things you just need to kind of focus on about what do I need to know about this? How do I use this as a tool to make my product better, to make me more productivity, or whatever it is. So if you focus on that and keep in the back of your mind some of these issues that you have to consider, you'll do fine.
So I'm very concerned about privacy laws, and I know that most people aren't really aware of what's going on. And I know September 22nd, Quebec's laws are going to be where the penalties start, and it's huge, like 2% of your gross global revenue or 10 million, and they don't care if you're small or big. So I feel that there is a lot of lack of awareness on majority of companies, and I'm wondering, especially from you, David, but of course from Simon and Christina, if you were able to pass on some advice, what could you do? Like if we were having a drink together, what would you tell me that I could tell people so that I can help them with this concern, especially as we introduce the AI? I'm really interested on what you think are the low-hanging fruit of vulnerability for organizations. Thank you.
Yeah, so from the privacy side, privacy has a few fundamental things. You shouldn't be collecting, using, or sharing personal information without people's consent. So when it comes to an AI tool, you have to be extremely careful about what you're doing with it. Primarily, you don't want to be putting anybody's personal information in any of these tools. And personal information is any information about anybody. So, and your point about the Quebec laws, in the European Union, the GDPR has massive fines for violation. Like you said, it's based on percentages of your revenues, and the numbers are ridiculously high. The GDPR is so complicated that my understanding is a lot of mid-sized businesses can't even comply with it. And Quebec has passed a similar sort of legislation, and some of the tough parts of it do kick in a month or two. And they have this same high level of fines. The Quebec privacy law is so unique and so tough that a lot of small businesses are just going to say, I'm not going to service people in Quebec. It's not worth my while to figure out whether I'm doing this properly or not. The law there is so, because Quebec is civil law, the law is so different that even I won't touch it. Like, I have a law firm in Quebec that if I need advice on Quebec privacy, I would defer to them. But we're headed in that way anyway. The CPPA that will eventually replace PIPEDA, I don't know how far we're out, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, I'm not sure. It's going to have that same fine structure. So we're seeing privacy morph from a model where you get advised, you get cajoled, you get strong-armed into doing it right, to massive potential fines for getting things wrong. So when this, so like I said, you might want to avoid Quebec with your products unless you spend some time and money to figure that out. And we're going to get to a place in the rest of the country within the next year or so where there's this new privacy law is coming in, and it's going to require more diligence, and it's going to require more policies. In the current regime, if you try and you get it wrong, you're going to get the privacy commissioner saying, well, you kind of got that wrong, but if you change this, you'll be okay. And the companies go, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was doing it right, and you change it, and you're cool. Under the new one, that's not going to be the case. So, whether it's privacy in general or whether it's privacy, what you're doing with personal information with AI tools, it's going to become far more critical in the future than it is now.
I just think as my reflection on that is as humble as this, right? These tools can be used for good or ill, but at the end of the day, it defaults to the ethical standards of your organization. As a leader, you have a job, a role to play in stating what are the ethical values of your organization. Mm-hmm. You could use these to cheat, manipulate, et cetera, or you can use them to support decision making. Mm-hmm. And as David alluded to, even with some of the employment tools, there is inherent biases. Mm-hmm. We know there's some biases in programming. And so if you are going to pull the tool out there, understand the limitations, its limitations, but also the biases, and understand the ethical standards you want to abide by, particularly when you're dealing with confident information, private information.
And I think it's becoming more, I mentioned when I talked about we should have, and we may be starting to see a trend towards companies having a chief ethical officer. And I think you can, from the way this discussion is going, I think you can see why, why that thought is there, because there's a massive amount of ethical issues around a lot of this stuff. And it can make or break your company. If you get it wrong, people aren't going to use you. They're going to leave in droves. And if you get nailed with, one of these sanctions or fines, it may bankrupt your company. So it's really important to get it right for a number of reasons.
Hello. Well, actually, I'm a small business consulting firm owner, and I'm helping fellow small businesses. And I have a point to make, and I would love to hear your comments about it. So most of the time, small businesses use this, especially the text side, the language processors of these AI tools, for creating content, for, let's say, blog posts, social media. And the thing is, they are thinking, obviously, they are saving a great amount of time to do that by doing so. But the thing is, when they don't revisit the content they created with AI, they don't reread it. And I'm not talking about the factual information, even even if all the factual information is correct, the language, the voice, the tone of the AI is just so exaggerated. So it's just so unnatural. So that small business, most of the time, they lost their genuineness. So they lost their voice, they lost their intimacy with their target audience, and this may make them more harm than good. And I think this is a point that should be addressed besides the legal side of it.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think two answers to that. You can, in some of these tools, talk about the tone. So you can say, I want it in the tone of, stuff I've done before. You can do that sometimes. The other thing is that, even in the normal world, everybody needs an editor, right? So, I write my blog posts. Maria looks at them, and if I've done something wrong, she'll edit them or tell me that, this doesn't read right. And everybody needs that, no matter how good you are. Same thing as AI output. It needs an editor, and you can't just, to create a blog post, you can't just push the button and publish it. You've got to read it. You've got to make sure, does this have the right tone for my company? Is it something that, if it talks about facts, you want to take a few minutes and fact check it? So it's not a set and forget thing. It was funny, not too long ago, I read a post by someone. He said, I used this tool to create this blog post. It was great. It saved me so much time. Then he went in and told about all the steps he went through from creation and editing. And when he went through all that, I'm thinking, wait a minute. You could have just written that in less time than it took you to do that. So, we'll get there. It's getting better. But yeah, it's not a set and forget thing. You have to pay attention to it to make sure that it's what you want to publish.
Unfortunately, there is not much of a, let's say, small businesses usually don't have that knowledge and aren't aware of the effects of this language on their business. So they usually don't know how to do it, or they usually don't know if it might be harmful for them. So that's the kind of.
Yeah, well, it's an education process, and that's one of the messages that we like to get out to small business is, you've got to understand these issues and don't just create that blog post and throw it out, or create your owner's manual and throw it out without paying attention to it and making sure that the quality is the same quality that it would if you had written it yourself or if you had engaged a professional to do it.
I just want to make a quick comment. Like you said, wouldn't it take just as much time to write it yourself or create these posts yourself than actually use AI? Why would we even go through the hassle of using AI if it's going to take just as much time doing it ourselves?
Yeah, so the question was, why would we spend the time on using AI when it takes just as much time as doing it ourselves? And that's an excellent question. I think we may get, depending on how good you are with your prompting, prompting is a real skill, and you're using it to edit, and as the tools get better, I think we'll get to the stage where it's better, faster, and cheaper maybe to use the tools. But depending on what you're doing, you're right. It may not, at the moment, be better, faster, and cheaper. I've tried to experiment a little bit when I'm writing my own blogs, because I write one every week, and I haven't been able yet to have it create anything that's I'm remotely happy with. Now, partly it's because, well, I'm kind of picky, but I'm writing about stuff that's new and somewhat cutting edge, and the tools are based on what's already published. So it's creating based on stuff that's old. So it's not a thought leader, right? And I've even asked it, sometimes I'll have a mental block and say, I don't know what I'm going to write about for next week. And I'll ask ChatGPT for suggestions. And it's like, well, I wrote about that a month ago. I wrote about that 6 months ago. I don't know. So.
Just to touch on that point also, we also can't forget about the original AI of actual intelligence. So just something to keep in mind there. That's a great point. To start, that writer's block. I'm not an essay lover. I don't love writing essays, but if I want to write my own blog, it's good to start and get that idea in your head, but it'll never replace what humans can do.
Yeah. Well, you're right. You have to remember the actual intelligence. I think it might at some point replace what humans can do, but we're nowhere near it yet. And we just have to kind of be thoughtful and careful about what we're doing with it.
I don't think I need to stand for this one. I would respond to your question would be, as a person who is a student and a leader within London, and English is my second language, I tend to add a lot of filler words
Yes.
and pronouns and verbs that are not necessary in any written context. So I find I write everything I want, within the limits or the paragraphs that I want to share. Thank you. After which I submit it through ChatGPT to really just iron it out. And to your point, I can never use that the way it spits it back out.
Yeah.
I do need to go back in there and edit so I don't lose my thought process in the writing.
Yeah.
So what does that do for me? It just strengthens my thought process in a more concise way for someone whose English is their second language. So that would be just an example of how I would utilize this technology. But then with the financial question, I just lost hope there. And I said, this is, there's work needs to be done on this and limitations from work perspective.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And it's a tool. It's not a replacement, right? That's the way you have to look at it. It's not perfect, but it's a useful tool. Just like Wikipedia is a useful tool, Google's a useful tool, AI is another useful tool. Yeah.
If nothing more, for David, when you were talking about your blog post and some original writing, if nothing more, it can offer a confidence boost of you were on the right track and that your original writing actually is superior. But using it as an editing tool is really, really helpful. And the hack or the upskill is trying the different prompts. And maybe you're opening a couple and you're trying a prompt with this copy, then the prompt is, make the language more or less formal, or increase formality, reduce word count. There's so many different prompts, and it's for those of you, especially at the early stages of using this particular technology, just try different things, and you'll know when it will be best for you and for your company, and your use is definitely going to be different than the person beside you. But yeah, it's, I think what we've talked about is it's a tool, it provides insight, might be the confidence boost, it might actually just be how you can synthesize copy in particular or thoughts in particular. But getting good at prompts in this tool is really one of the hacks.
Yeah, and you will find that if, for example, you want to use ChatGPT, I use that example just because it was the first one to come out. There's tons of them out there. But if you do a Google search and help me with ChatGPT prompts, there's a gazillion people out there that are trying to help do that. So if you look at some of those, try some of it, see what works for yourself. I think you'll find that you'll do a lot better. It's a learning curve. Any other questions?
I'm going to excuse myself, first of all, because I may not voice this correctly, but if nobody's responsible, then who's going to take responsibility in the end? Because if we can't trust right now, I think trust is a real issue for a lot of people, certainly after COVID, that whole experience there. I am very challenged by what I'm reading. You're suggesting, too, that here is a tool that we can't totally rely on. Well, where's the responsibility lie?
That is a good question. I think that we're running out of time here, and I think that is a good question to leave this on. And, that's one reason why governments are trying to create legislation around this. We have to take the responsibility for what we do so that it's right. And as far as what gets published, it's going to be more difficult. The publishing platforms, the social media platforms have a part to play in this. They already spend huge amounts of time and effort in trying to deal with false information. It's a real difficult job for them. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but and I'm not sure how that's going to get sorted out, but it is ultimately the big question around this. So just if I'd ask both of you, just any ending comments here?
I just have one last comment. So as I said at the very beginning, we're opening an innovation center at Fanshawe. It's on the main campus. It's designed to help you as medium and small businesses use tools, including these kinds of tools. And so if you want it open to collaboration and how we can use our students and faculty to help solve some of your business needs. And so it's designed around those partnerships and designed around helping you incubate and adopt some of these technologies in your own work.
I would probably just say in closing too, what we're talking about today, it's going to be different in 6 months. It's going to be different in a year. The example that you used about the photograph of the deer and what it looked like a year ago and what it looked like, or the generated image, not the photograph. And I think that the next time we spend time together on a topic like this, I'm sure all three of us will have potentially very different answers because of the speed to which this technology can be used for good. But it was certainly a pleasure to spend time with you today, and really good questions from the audience. I have such a curiosity about where each of you are in your own journeys, what you're dabbling in, and hopefully when I see you in community, we can have those discussions.
And I'd like to thank both of you for being here today with us. It's been a great discussion, great questions from the audience, and we look forward to seeing where this AI journey takes everybody.
So I want to personally thank everybody on behalf of the Chamber and our members for this. It was incredible. I knew it was going to be. A couple of things I take away from this is, you talk about chief ethical officers and small businesses aren't going to be able to do that. Tells me that there's a real role for the Chamber in trying to continue, it's almost like continuing education. Now, Christina, I know you have an AI session coming up, right? Do you want to mention that? Do you not?
Well, yes, I would love to. I don't know who's still on. I would love to mention it, but I don't remember the date right off the top of my head.
Well, go to visit the TechAlliance website.
Just don't put that in recording.
TechAlliance website, and of course David's ebook.
Yes.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But I also think, for the Chamber, I mean, obviously, sounds like we need policies.
Yeah.
People like you like experts can help us, but we're going to have to develop those policies, and we're not going to be able to do it on our own. Even the chambers don't. I mean, chambers themselves are fumbling around. They have no idea where to go with this. The other thing, David, I take away is just reliance on governments, right? You and I are old enough to remember the chaos around copyright reform. Sort of took almost, 15 years. And they ended up with a product which was more of a muddle than anything else. So I really don't think we can rely on them, and I think you're right. And I think even after the copyright reform, I don't want to call it a debacle, but it was a screw up. I think governments are going to be even more leery. How do we step in? What do we do? Where do we go? So I think there's a role for chambers. I think I've learned that, and certainly hearing from those of you in the audience who are smaller businesses. And, I did like that idea about, just trying to be your own ethical officer, like your point. Try to do the best that you can. Thank you, and we'll say goodbye to everybody. Go back, have a great day, and use robot Dave. Maybe he can write our policy. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And don't forget, you've got your books to pick up out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put these two little things from the Southern First Nations Secretariat. They have QR things that you can scan. Takes you 10 seconds.
We're going to do it in front of the band. I'm just going to move it over a little bit. Yeah, we can do both. I can do them side by side.
No, I never remember mine.
just gonna see if I can move this up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah.